So when you come down here to your laboratory, in here, you have a installing and getting familiar with the IO lab. You click on that. You've got a video on what you see when you unbox your IO lab. You've got the directions for installing the software for your IO lab and how do you run the application. So you get that and how to calibrate the device. So you'll now, luckily for us, this first lab doesn't necessarily require calibrating the device, okay? But this lab, we're actually going to utilize it, and you come in here. So this lab, what we're going to do is we are trying to match the motion. So what we've been covering is motion in one dimension. And we talked about in that first lab, you had to describe the motion that you saw in the graph. In this lab, what we're going to do is we're going to move the IO lab such that it's going to match the graphs. So when you open up your graph matching, you do have some other laboratory instructions, but here are the specific instructions that we're going to do. So this is just like the laboratory that we would do as the physical lab, except we're going to be using the IO lab. What you're going to do is you're going to set up your IO application and your IO lab. And when you do that, you're going to get this screen. And I'm going to come back and I will show you this screen here and we'll show you how it goes. And I've tried to give you step-by-step instructions. What I want you to do is move your IO device, wheels down, right? We're going to move our IO device and we're going to move it such that as I move it across my desktop or the table or whatever I'm dragging my device by, I want to mimic this graph. I want to try and get this graph. Now, am I asking you to be perfect? No. What I'm asking for is whatever graph you submit has that shape. Okay? You may have more jitters with it. You may have a variety of things. I'm not asking for it to be perfect because what we're trying to do in this lab, and we're trying to get you the feel of if I move my cart this way, this is what the graph is going to do. If I move my cart that way, this is what the graph is going to do. If I accelerate, I want to see how that graph works. And if I decelerate, I want to see how that graph works. You're going to do that for these two graphs. Now, these are position versus time graphs. It gets a little trickier when you are doing, this is another position versus time graph, but when you're doing a velocity versus time graph, it's going to get a little trickier. And again, I'm not asking you to do it perfectly. I want that general shape. And it's getting you familiar with how do I move this object? What does the graph look like? So you have that and you have those here. When you write your laboratory memo, when you're giving me your laboratory memo, I want pictures of the graphs that you did. Okay. I want to see those pictures. And I want you to, in your narrative, answer these questions. I don't want what type of motion is occurring when the slope of the graph is 0. It's standing still. I don't want you to answer the question step by step. I want you to describe and give me a narrative. And these questions are to help you write that narrative. So you're not going, I'm not filling this out. These aren't cookbook labs, even though this one's written like a cookbook lab. That's not what I'm looking for in your memo. Okay? And you have your time, position versus time graph, and you have your velocity versus time graph. So that's the gist of the lab that we're doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize I've got all kinds of stuff out. So let's go ahead and we'll get rid of all my Discord and everything. And I'm going to pull up the laboratory here. I'm going to, when you come in, you can see that I made sure everything was working before I came in. When you get your lab, there's an on-off button, and you will plug in your USB device, okay? You'll plug in your USB device, and you will turn on your laboratory. And when you turn on your laboratory, you're going to get little flickers of light. So you can actually see them blinking here. When you do that, it'll say it's connected, okay? That's where we know it's connected. And we're going to reset everything. When we come in, you're going to check the wheel sensor. So if I click this off, I get a blank screen. If I click the accelerometer, it's going to give me an accelerometer in here, okay? We are going to click the wheel because that's what we're going to do. We're going to get a position versus time plot, a velocity versus time plot, and acceleration versus time plot. In this lab, we don't need the acceleration, but it's fun to see it as we're doing the lab. So basically what I'm getting ready to do is I'm going to put my wheels on my surface, and I'm going to actually move it around here. So I'm going to click this, and I'm going to turn on the run and hit record. And now I'm going to move my device back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So you can see as I'm moving it here across my little box, so that you can actually see me moving it across on my little box, you're seeing the graph being produced on the screen. And basically, that's all we're doing is you are matching the motion on this graph. Okay. Questions about this lab?